Hello everybody and welcome to my video. My name is BadGhost1000 and happy Bionicle Day. To mark the 20th anniversary of the Hordika Arc, I'll be diving into one of its primary villains, Roodaka, Viceroy of the Visorahk Horde. One of the 3 Titan sets released that year, she is the 3rd female antagonist in Bionicle's initial run with an official model. She is the most prominent villainess of the series, having both a retroactive impact on the full story, as well as having her own relevant appearances after her introduction. She could also be considered the major villain of the Hordika Arc, outclassing her fellow villain Visorahk within this arc. Sadly, she is the only villainess with the set that gets this level of prominence in the initial overarching story. Kadok and Gadok aren't evil, and are revealed to serve a fundamental purpose to the functioning of the Great Spirit. Gorast, while a significant foe, only really appears once, and that was during the Battle for Power arc in 2008. Same with Galva, with the adage that she played a more supportive role for the villains. The only villainesses who come close to Roodaka in terms of prominence are Lariska and Tortuyet, who never receive official sets or an official design. Regardless, she is a fantastic character and a notable villainess, not just in Bionicle, but in young fiction in general. But before we dive into said character, let's take a brief overview of her story. A vortex native to the island of Zia, she took the rite of passage climbing the islands of a mountain in which she sacrificed her partner and earned high accolades as a result. Sometime later, she made her way to the base of the Dark Hunters, where she asked their leader, the Shadow One, to be trained in their ways without joining their organization. After initially being rejected, she was able to barter her request by turning the X-Tor Nadiki into an insectoid form. After that, she became affiliated with the Brotherhood of Makuta, where she got into a rivalry with Visorahk. This came to a head when the Visorahk stole the Kanoe Voki. While the 6 managed to escape with the mask, she managed to transform them into a Visorahk beforehand. However, Visorahk took credit for the idea, wrongfully earning the title of King of the Visorahk. He would name her as his Viceroy in an attempt to make her his queen and earn political status on Zia. She instead withheld her answer, leaving him on until shortly after the Great Cataclysm. By that time, Makuta Pterodax summoned them via telepathy, calling for their aid after his defeat and imprisonment by the Tor Metru. Roodaka herself would carve a shard from his seal upon arriving in Menchinoy and place it on her chest plate. Upon the Tor Metru's return to the city and immediate capture, she managed to convince Visorahk to mutate them rather than merely execute them. However, the Tor Metru, now Tor Hordika, was saved by the Visorahk before they fell to their deaths. Despite this, Roodaka was able to capture and turn the leader of Vakama, setting up the capture of 5 of the Visorahk as well as Visorahk's death. However, before she could capture the rest of the Tor Hordika, Vakama defected from her and freed the Visorahk Horde. United, the Tor Hordika fired the elements upon her, which rendered her unconscious. At the same time, it destroyed the shard embedded in her chestplate, breaking the seal that trapped Pterodax. She was teleported by him to safety. Supposedly dead, she returned to Zia and made a second trek up its mountain. Sometime after that, she became a double agent between the Dark Hunters and the Brotherhood of Makuta, as the organizations warred amongst each other. This didn't last, as the Shadow One found out and made a deal with the Tor Nua to eliminate her. Instead, they blackmailed her into reverting the Rahaga back to Tor Haga. She was then detained and put on a team led by Roodaka to find and free Makuta Miserex, the former leader of the Brotherhood of Makuta. Despite the dysfunction and backstabbing, they succeeded in their mission, and she aided Roodaka in freeing him. However, she attempted to manipulate Miserex into turning on her. In response, he sent her flying into a wall and knocked her out. She was then taken to the pit, and later relocated to Smear's Mountain once the planet reformed. Whew. Now with that covered, let's dive in. As a vortex, she was immersed in a hyper-capitalist environment. The core virtues of Zia are profit and self-interest. Thus, she would have developed the skills and mindset needed to fulfill both. Yet she didn't just learn the bare essentials to survive in her home and call it a day. She excelled. She pushed herself practically to be the embodiment of these virtues. She pushed her mind as well as her body to match her ambitions. The end result being a cunning, duplicitous opportunist with her sights on rulership. But why though? What put such a fire in her? Well, this is only speculation on my part, but as a female vortex, she would have had a slightly higher position early on in her life. Perhaps she had a mentor who gave her opportunities to oversee the production and or development of various weapons. Perhaps being put in a position of authority whet her appetite for leadership. This would turn into an insatiable obsession, one that could only be sated by moving up in her society. Again, that is just a theory. But regardless of how she acquired her ambition, it proved time and again to be her greatest strength, as well as her greatest weakness. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's continue on to something more concrete. Canonically, she has attempted to manipulate 5 main characters. Her initial dealings with the Shadow One were merely transactional. She wanted training but didn't want to join the organization to do it. And she was only able to barter with him once Nadiki offered to train her. It does beg the question, what would she have done if Nadiki didn't approach her?
My guess is that after trying to buy her training with either money or some type of advanced weaponry, only to be turned down, her only recourse would have been to capture a dog hunter and convince them to train her. Of course, that would put a target on her back, should the Shadow One ever find out, but I digress. Atop this exchange, the only other notable interaction they've had is during the war between the Brotherhood of Makuta and the Dark Hunters. As stated in the history section, she acted as a double agent during that conflict. It was only until the time of the Marhi Nui arc that the Shadowed One discovered this and made arrangements to have her dealt with. Now, we aren't given an exact time for when Roodaka began her involvement in the war, but assuming that she took at least a decade to recover from Metro Nui and reestablish her status on Zia, that's just under 1,000 years. That's a long time to play both sides with neither of them being the wiser. That alone is proof of her cunning. As for how she got discovered by the Shadow One, that's also up to speculation. My guess is that going that long of a time span undiscovered made her increasingly reckless. Her ambition led her to take greater risks, which escalated at a slow yet consistent rate. And we know the end result of that. Next is her co-worker Visorahk, whom she had the most success in manipulating. First meeting him between 7,000 and 3,000 years before the arrival of the Tormata, she had plenty of time to figure him out. While he did outplay her for the leadership position of the Visorahk Horde, she was able to read him like a book and lead him by the metaphorical nose. She saw his insecurities in his position, and she either put him on the spot to prove his mettle or sate his ego to make him more suggestible. She saw his desire for an alliance and fainted interest in the idea. She did this with expert calculation until the opportunity presented itself where she set him up for death. And he was none the wiser for her tactics. Now, they do share an interesting dynamic with each other. In many ways, Visorahk is a warped mirror to Roodaka. Both have great ambition and are willing to use any method to see it through. However, Visorahk lied his way to his position, and whatever he generally attempted to do in canon, he failed at. He also lacked any subtlety, relying primarily on brute force, both tactically and as an individual combatant. Roodaka, by contrast, worked for her position. With one notable exception, she managed to find ways to succeed despite the obstacles in her way. And her primary mode of operation is manipulation and deception. They also create a love triangle of sorts with Pterodax. While in canon, Visorahk merely wanted a political alliance, and Roodaka simply respected Pterodax, in Web of Shadows, their mannerisms tell a different story. Visorahk's dialogue delivery and body language clearly indicate infatuation with Roodaka. The same can be said for Roodaka with the way she holds herself when talking to Pterodax. This, in turn, is another similarity between the two, as they both pine for someone who does not reciprocate, at least not as much as they do. And this unrequited love is what eventually led to their downfall. Vakama is up next. Now, unlike Visorahk, she had much less to work with here. When her initial plan to drain the Toro Hordika of their elements got thwarted, she had to rely on her personal spy network to find the weak link among them. And Vakama fit the bill, being both uncertain about completing his duty, frustrated by his team, and struggling to control his recently acquired bestial tendencies. All things she could manipulate to her advantage. She expertly weaponized his nostalgia for his home, giving him a false hope to return to a simpler time. She also gave him a means to complete his objective, a new leadership position with an unquestioning army. After he defected, she continued to feed his head with delusions of kingship, and that his Tor team was holding him back. However, these specific threads she pulled could only cloud his judgment as long as his spite remained. Once the main source of his ire, Matau, apologized and reminded him of his duty, her hold on him dissipated immediately, and he even managed to pull a fast one on her, removing the Visorahk Horde as a factor in the process. Still, she managed to get him and the other Tor Hordika to do what she ultimately wanted in the end, though the process itself was more painful than she desired. This is a great showing of her cunning. With minimal intel, she was able to get an accurate read on her target and formulate a plan on how to utilize them as an asset. In this particular case, she used Vakama to gain more influence over the Visorahk Horde and to act as a lure for the other Tor Hordika. And, even in the face of defeat, she finds creative solutions to complete her objectives. However, her manipulation of Vakama highlights one of her flaws. She overestimates how much control she has in a given situation. This, in turn, can leave her open to be blindsided and cause her to overextend her plays. It was only through Pterodactyl's intervention that she avoided capture. Finally, there's Spira and Visorahk. At this point in her story, she had been exposed for the duplicitous schemer that she was, and was in a situation where she had little control, and once their objective was completed, she would be incarcerated. In other words, she's at her most desperate. She had to figure a way out to orchestrate her escape. Once Spira attempted his takeover, she felt that now would be a good time to get him on her side. She tried by offering him an opportunity to take over the Brotherhood of Makuta. However, he refused, stating that her name had become synonymous with treachery. While his reasoning was part of it, he seemed far more focused on revenge at that point. He wanted to wipe the Skakti, whom he blamed for his exile, off the face of the universe. Now, Spira would fail in his takeover, as he himself underestimated Roodaka's resolve and connections. She wouldn't try to escape until they arrived in Visorakh's prison. Once he was freed, she attempted to convince him that Roodaka and his allies were merely using him as a pawn to fight against the Brotherhood of Makuta, and that she was his only true ally. Of course, this attempt was doomed from the start. Visorahk absorbed Spira beforehand and would have all of his fellow Makuta's memories as a result. A similar effect happened when Pterodactyl absorbed Nidiki, Kreka, and the Nevite he had under his control. As such, he would have known of Roodaka and her treacherous nature. Even if that wasn't the case, Visorahk was betrayed by Pterodactyl, and that betrayal led to his imprisonment. He would be extra sensitive to any sort of manipulative tactic, regardless of how much truth there was in it. The best move for her at that point would have been to wait it out, but her desperation and ambition caused her to make her move prematurely. Thus, she was imprisoned, putting herself in a situation where she had to rely on Pterodactyl's plan. But, as stated before, he did not care for her in the same way she might have. His rescue of her in Metru Nui was less an act of genuine care and more of a way to square his debt to her for freeing him. And that's ultimately where her story ends. Could she have made an escape attempt during the migration of the entire inhabitants of the Great Spirit Robot? I'd like to think so. Narratively speaking, she embodies the femme fatale archetype. As I've hopefully shown, she relies heavily on her ability to manipulate others to serve her ends. She finds whatever weakness her targets have, whether it be insecurity, frustration, or ambition, and offers them solutions to their ills. She positions herself as their only true ally, only to dispose of them once they've served their purpose to her. However, if she makes a bad read on her target, or they see through her musings, they will not be swayed. Fortunately, she does have other talents to back her up if her manipulative tactics are insufficient. Aside from being strong enough to rip a buried troller from the ground, she has trained herself to be able to fire shadow energy, which she has used to incapacitate Kitongu and help Roodaka free Visorahk. Her most notable ability, though, has to be her mutation Roodaka. When armed with a Roodaka launcher, she can permanently change the form of anyone she targets to one of her choosing. Said change can only be reversed should she fire upon them again, and will it so. It is this ability that is most documented. Aside from Nidiki and the Torahaga, she has used it to aid in the creation of Visorahk, as well as mutated the Dark Hunter's silence and a Dewey Copen that she used for his steed at one point. The Dark Hunter tracker might have been a victim as well, but that has never been confirmed. It was this ability that allowed her and Brutaka's team to remove some of the obstacles guarding Visorahk. However, she can't mutate herself with this ability. She also never used it on Makuta, implying that it wouldn't work on them. In summation, she is truly a formidable force to be reckoned with. However, she was too ambitious for her own good. At any point during her long career, she could have made compromises to her vision to ensure her success. She could have ruled the Visorahk Horde by proxy alongside Visorahk. She could have ended her dealings with both the Brotherhood Makuta and the Dark Hunters once she had become a leader in Zia. She could have attempted to foster trust with Brutaka, giving her an opening to escape. Instead, she chose her pride, and that, as with many, led to her fall. Well, that'll just about cover this character analysis on Roodaka. Enjoy the rest of this my Uncle Day. Thank you very much for watching, and remember to explore those horizons of creativity. Okay, bye!